Hello, Jeff Brozovich from LongRangeOnly.com here. And what we're going to do today is a little kind of a double gear review and also how-to video, instructional video on how to properly install and bed an XTreme hardcore gear 20-minute rail base on this short action rifle. So stick with us. We're going to go over the full procedure to make sure your rail is on right, true, and stays put. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to move the camera here, zoom you in on all the supplies we're going to need to bed a rail onto this rifle the proper way. So let me move the camera in here. We'll take a look at what I use when I do this entire process. Okay, as we go over the item needed, first thing we're going to look at here is the rail we chose. This is the XTreme hardcore gear, short action, 20-minute true level rail. It's got the bubble level built right in the back of it. We like these rails. It kind of saves a step by putting the bubble in the back of the rail. We won't have to add a anti-cant device to the rifle. It'll already be installed once we get this rail put on. Next, our two-part epoxy. I'm using JB Weld Quick. A lot of people might say, oh, we don't want to use JB Weld. Use any epoxy you like. Whatever you like best, use it. I've been using this for a long time. I use it specifically just on rails, and I've never had an issue. So that's what I'm going to be using today. Next, Johnson's Paste Wax. This is what we'll apply for a release agent to the areas we don't want to adhere with the epoxy. A straight edge, so we can check the top of our rail for level. A pin light put behind that straight edge. I'll show you how that works later. Some Q-tips for cleanup. A little plastic spatula that I like to scrape the excess epoxy off with. A feeler gauge. Torx driver. And of course a torque wrench. And some acetone for cleanup. And we'll be using some paper towels as well. So we've got our 6.5 Creedmoor and a Christensen Arms MESA rifle here, short action. We bought the right rail for it, and so we're ready to get started. First thing we're going to do, we're going to remove the bolt from the rifle. That's going to do two things. First and foremost, it's a safety thing. Second, if we get any epoxy down in this, by accident in these screw holes, we don't want it going down on top of our bolt. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check our rail without any epoxy and just see how it fits. So what you want to do is you set it on there, and we're just going to put one screw. I'm going to use the short one here. We'll put it in the very front hole on the rail base, and we're just going to run it down snug. Then we're going to look for movement here. I don't see any movement, so I'm going to try to shove my feeler gauge underneath there. And I've got a little bit of slack there. I couldn't really pick it up on trying to flex the rail, but I got a little slack there. So the next thing we'll want to do is we want to make sure our rail is square on top. So I'm going to take my straight edge, put it on top of the rail. I'm going to shine my light behind it as I look through here and see if I can see daylight. Just in case our rail in manufacturing or shipping got tweaked, and I don't see any daylight. So the rail is square on top. The problem is the feeler gauge proves it. We got a gap back here at the back, and that's not good. To double check everything even further, we'll pull that screw out of the front hole, and we'll put that screw in the very back hole. And again, just snug it down. Now look at that. I don't know if you can see that or not, but we got flex on the front of the rail. Feeler gauge goes in with ease. We got a lot of clearance there. So that's the whole idea of what we're going to try to do here. We're going to try to keep the top of this rail perfectly flat when it's tightened down. If we tighten it down the way it is, it would put an arc in the top of that rail, and that arc, through our scope rings, get transferred into our scope tube, which could cause problems as far as the way our erector works on our scope, or it could, it's putting undue stress on that scope, could have a tracking issue, cause all kinds of problems. Not to mention that when we're like this, the chances of us having a full 100% contact between the bottom of the rail and the top of the receiver is pretty slim here. So by applying just a little thin layer of epoxy and doing it properly, we're going to ensure 100% of the contact surfaces are mated to each other for a perfect match. Those little screws that go in here, they just hold that down. It is the actual sheer force of those two mating surfaces tight against each other that actually is what holds your scope on. Not them little screws. Those screws just apply the clamping force. In the event that you don't want your rail to be glued to the receiver, you need to apply a release agent somewhere. I recommend that if you want to have a system where you can take the rail on and off and not leave the epoxy stuck to your rifle, apply the Johnson's paste wax or Kiwi shoe polish or whatever you might get. Just take a brush and brush it on top and coat the top of the action. That way, whenever after the epoxy all dries and you pull your rail off, all the epoxy will stay on the rail. So my preferred method of putting this on, I don't use a release agent. I don't care if this glues itself on there. I know that if I ever want to remove it, I can use a heat gun or a blow dryer and take it off and then clean up my action and stuff with some acetone and maybe a little plastic scraper or something to get that epoxy off. It can be removed, it's more work, but I like to utilize the epoxy strength in this process also. So I'm not going to apply the release agent to my receiver. I'm going to clean everything up right now with a little acetone and get ready for the application of the epoxy. Little acetone on the rag. Just using a paper towel here. I'm going to clean the top. Make sure there's no greases there. And I'm going to clean the bottom of my rail also. Just to make sure there's no oils or anything on there and my epoxy is going to adhere properly. For the initial application, we don't want the epoxy to get in our threaded holes or to get on our screw threads and lock them in for us before we're ready to do the final torque. So I've taken the Johnson's paste wax and I've applied it to the threads on all the screws and have them ready to go. Let me mix up some epoxy now and we'll look at where we put that epoxy on the rail and how we start our initial torque down. So I mixed a 50-50 ratio of my two-part epoxy. I've applied it to the bottom of the rail. Notice I've stayed away from my screw holes. I want to try to keep that epoxy from going in them screw holes. So what I need to do now, got to work pretty fast here, this is quick, is I'm going to position, watching for my screw holes, the rail on there. Just set it, let its own weight do the work. Now I'm going to take my shortest screw, the shortest screw on a Remington 700 or a clone, Remington 700 clone action like this, goes in the front hole, just till it touches. Then I'll take my other screws, I'm going to go to the back here and drop one of them in. And remember, all these screws have got the release agent, the Johnson's floor wax on it. Like I said, you can use Kiwi if you want, shoe polish. There's probably many other things you could use. Okay, I've got them all started in. My rail's on there. I'm going to start torquing down. I'm going to start with my center two, lightly torque them down. You're going to see your epoxy spread out as you do this. And just keep working it and let that epoxy spread out. Just snug. Notice I'm not over tightening. Snugging it down. Going back and forth over all of them. Just a little bit of torque. We can kind of tell when we're getting down there and we're just squeezing out the epoxy, but we're not going to flex the rail. I'm going to do a check here now again with my straight edge to make sure that no light shines underneath that on top of all my lugs the entire length of the rail. And what this tells me is my rail is still true on top, and that's 50% of what we're trying to achieve here. Keeping the rail true without putting any flex in it that could be transferred into our scope tube, and also giving a firm mating surface of 100% contact between these two items we're trying to join together so that they'll have that nice shear fit and strength. So my rail is on there, just enough tension put on the screws to squish out the epoxy but not flex the rail. Just torque it down just enough that you squish some out, but don't overdo it. You don't want to over tighten it and defeat the purpose here by getting our rail out of whack. Now I'm going to take my little plastic spatula, you can use a piece of wood or an ice cream stick or whatever, and I'm going to go around the rail. My epoxy's already starting to set up, and this will be an easy job. And we're just going to get the excess of that epoxy that's squeezed out like that. If you wait long enough like this so it's just started to set up, it's a little easier job. Kind of a little less messy. I'm going to go all the way around and clean all that epoxy off. So I've been all the way around with my little plastic scraper. I've got all the big lumps and the big part off, and all that's left is just a little trace around there. So now I'm going to take my Q-tip, get a little acetone on it, and go around again and let that acetone work for me and loosening that up and cleaning off the excess of epoxy. All the way around on all four sides of both the front and rear pad. And then the final cleanup will be a paper towel, a generous amount of acetone, and just clean her up. This will make sure you have a professional looking finish without any globs or gluey sticky stuff goobing out there looking like a 3-year-old did it. But anyway, cleaning it up now. I'll finish cleaning and we'll go on to the next step. So we're completely cleaned up all the way around our rail, all the way around our pads. It's two dark surfaces together there, so if you need to take your light, shine along there and look and make sure you got all that epoxy cleaned up real nice so you'll have a professional finished look. Now what I'm going to do is I like to wait plenty of time for this next step. So I like to do this part in the evening and then come back out in the morning and torque in my screws and Loctite them. But so what we're going to do now is we're going to give us a good amount of time to cure. One of the things you can do, this is a little tub that I mixed my my epoxy on. I have a little bit of it left here, so I can test this periodically and see how hard it's getting. That way I'll know when the stuff under the rail has had its chemical reaction take place and it's hard and ready for me to actually torque the rail on down. So let's give it some hours here to wait, and I'll be back to finish this up in a little bit. So we've given this a good amount of time here. I've only waited 2 or 3 hours. I recommend waiting longer. If you can wait overnight, like I said, it's best. You want to make sure your epoxy is fully set up. And like I said, you can always look at what you had left on your little mixing thing here and get an idea how hard your epoxy is set up under the base. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to remove our mounting screws now, and we've coated them with the release agent, so they're going to back right out, no problem. The epoxy didn't get in there, and we should be good to go. And then you can also go inside and check and make sure nothing got pushed down in. Get your finger in there and feel the bottom of that screw hole. Make sure no epoxy got squished down in to your action. Especially, I like to especially check that on the second one back, because that screw does come through into your where your bolt lugs line up. So check that out real good. What I'm going to do here now, I've got these screws out. I'm going to clean the release agent off of these screws. Then we're going to put them back in and torque them. When I put them back in and torque them for the final time, I'm going to apply blue Loctite. And I forgot to put that blue Loctite out there at first when I was showing you the items needed to do this. So add blue Loctite to that list. And let me get these screws cleaned up. I'm just going to swish them in a little acetone and dry them, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we're getting ready to Loctite our screws here. And I told you I like to let the epoxy adhere to the two surfaces and keep it together. But in order to give you a better idea what we've done here, I've knocked this loose so I can show you what we achieved by bedding the underside of this rail. So you can see all the voids are filled. Everything is nice and flat and smooth. And these two surfaces now are an exact mirror of each other. I guess if I put it on the right direction it'll help. They're an exact mirror of each other and the fit is perfect. So when we tighten them screws down, it can't go anywhere and it's not going to warp our base in any direction. So let's get some Loctite on them screws and torque her down. What I usually do is I just put a little bit of Loctite on my little thing here so I can just kind of roll my screws in a little bit. And roll my screw in there. We're going to start with our front one. Remember, this is our short screw because that's a blind hole that goes in on top of the barrel threads. Run it down a little bit. A little more Loctite. I'll go to my back screw. Run it down. I'm out of Loctite here. I'll just snug them all down. Okay, and we're going to grab our torque wrench. The specifications on this rail said to torque them to 22 inch-pounds. I've got my torque wrench set at 22 inch-pounds. I'm going to start in the center, work my way out, go over them all again. There they are, all torqued on, good and tight, perfect fitting rail. Ready for my scope. I got a Sig Sauer Whiskey 5 here and 3 to 15 by 52. All I need to do now, because I have my level on the back of the XTreme Hardcore Gear rail, all I need to do now is sight out there on my, I have a plumb bob hanging at 50 yards, and I'll true, keeping this level, I'll true my vertical lines to that plumb bob, and then I'll go ahead and shoot a tall target test to make sure that my turret tracks true and not just use the reticle of judgment. I always like to test and make sure by using the tall target test, and you can research that on what a tall target test is, but that's it. I'll make sure that nothing's interfering inside, my bolt works fine, and we're good to go. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you understand the procedure now. It's not that hard to properly install a rail and bed it to your action for that perfect fit that's going to stay there and stay put. And it's going to improve your accuracy. Trust me, without the stress on the scope and with the rail perfectly true on top and not the chance of it moving anywhere, you're going to find your rifle's going to shoot better. So, Jeff Brozovich from Long Range Only saying, hey, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Come over to longrangeonly.com. Check us out. Lots of knowledgeable guys there joining the conversation. You probably got some stuff you could share with us too. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We're plugging stuff daily, a lot going on. Hope to see you over there. So good shooting to you, and thanks for watching.